I want to touch on a very dangerous political movement. I'm calling it a political movement that's captured Western governments over the last few years. I call it Scientism. Science, not scientism, is about debate, transparency, questioning, and persistent, perhaps even radical scepticism. Its intellectual proposition is quite simple. Science, you have a hypothesis. You say, for example, the sun comes up in the west. Well, you collect evidence, and then you see whether any of the evidence contradicts the hypothesis you started with. And based on the evidence, you then finish by making a conclusion about the hypothesis, that is, whether it is correct or not. That is true science. But then there's the opposite. We have scientism, an ideology that demands that the punter trusts the quote-unquote scientists who've been appointed as government and corporation-backed experts as if he or she is a New Age priest. Take this bloke Flannery, for example, the bloke who told us, quote, the rain that falls won't fill our dams, unquote, even though our dams are now as full as they've ever been. According to the proponents of, quote, scientism, we can't question any of Flannery's science on human-induced climate change. That would be heresy, according to the political and corporate elites who made him the Australian of the Year. You'd be condemned as a climate denier and then labelled as some sort of corrupt apologist for the fossil fuel industry. The evidence of this phenomenon is abundant. Recently, the Australian Academy of Science sent a submission to the digital industry group that represents Facebook, Google, Twitter, TikTok and others, basically arguing that these media giants must take strong action against disinformation. Programs like this one. This is disinformation. And the so-called disinformation involves, as they say, climate denialism. The Australian Academy of Science take stronger action against disinformation. Funny this. The head of the Australian Academy of Science is Anna Maria Arabia, who happens to be a former advisor to the new Prime Minister Albanese. To Miss Arabia, I say this. Miss Arabia, have you read a 2022 scientific study, long name, titled Arctic Glaciers and Ice Caps Through the Holocene, a circumpolar synthesis of lake-based reconstructions? Forget that. From the Department of Earth and Planetary Sciences at Northwestern University. Its findings are damning. According to these real scientists, their compilation of Holocene lake-based glacier and ice cap records spanning the Arctic shows that 50% or more of the studied Arctic glacier and ice caps were smaller than they are at present, or even absent, between 12,000 and 10,900 years ago, and 10,000 to 3,400 years ago. 2, 80% or more of the glacier and ice caps were smaller than they are today, or absent entirely, between 7,900 and 4,500 years ago. In other words, the propaganda about the Arctic melting ice due to climate change is rubbish. Ice caps were smaller a few millennia ago, just as sea levels are now 120 metres higher than they were 20,000 years ago, just as carbon dioxide makes up a mere 0.04% of the atmosphere, and only 3% of that comes from human activity. The activist scientists practising scientism at many of our universities would say, censor all that. One must ask a simple question. Why don't they want you to know the truth?